Joe, quite a speech last night. The visuals were incredible. The speech itself was really trying to reach out to all Americans at the most perhaps divisive time in modern American history.
Well, and what matters the most to Donald Trump? Crowd size. The crowd size was absolutely massive. I mean, I could not believe what I was looking at. It was just absolutely, I mean, the people just came flooding in support of Kamala Harris. And I will say, in contrast to what Donald Trump has said, I thought it was compelling. I loved the message last night, and she kept going back to it, Willie. She kept going back to how people that disagree with her are not the enemy. She doesn't want to put them in jail. She wants to put them around the table and listen to them. She kept talking about finding common ground. She kept talking about compromise. She kept talking about being the president of all Americans, even those Americans who vote against her. And what a marked contrast. There's so many distractions in this campaign. Other news channels will get distracted with people who are not running in this campaign. What matters is what the two people who are running in this campaign are saying. And what they're saying right now is this, that for Donald Trump, if you oppose him, you're an enemy of America. You're an enemy from within. You're going to get arrested. And what Kamala Harris is saying is, I'm going to bring America together. I'm going to compromise. I'm going to forge consensus. And if you would disagree with me, you won't be on my enemies list. You'll be at my table, and we'll be talking about how to bring America together. And just so people don't think this is just some vague generality, she went right there with border crossings, illegal border crossings, securing the southern border. And what did she say? I will work with Republicans like James Lankford to pass his bill, a compromise bill, a tough bill that would have secured the southern border immediately. Donald Trump, he killed that bill because it didn't make sense for him politically. Let's turn the page. Let's move to a new chapter. Let's work with those who may not agree with us all the time.
Yeah, it was. First of all, as Mika said, the visual was striking. That was the implicit message, was that we are here at the place on one of the darkest days in American history began, January 6, 2021, here with a massive crowd. As you said, Joe, the original permit was for 8,000 people. Then they moved it to 20,000 people. They say there might have been up to 75,000 people, not just in the scanned area for security, but outside that area as well, waving American flags, talking about freedom and setting up the contrast. And, you know, for as deeply as we've been covering this race for, gosh, almost 2 years now, many Americans, as you talk about all the time, Joe, tune in this last week, even in the last weekend, and they say, okay, I've heard a lot of noise. Let me dial in. Let me lock in. Let me listen to what I'm dealing with here. And they saw it on display last night. And Vice President Harris kind of led the crowd there on a journey from the American Revolution, talking about the petty tyrant that was King George III, how American freedom, the thirst for freedom overcame that, invoking Normandy, invoking Seneca Falls, invoking Stonewall, all the moments where Americans pushed and fought for freedom, and how we're at this point again. And she suggested that we will not, this country, go back to another petty tyrant, talking about Donald Trump there. Yeah. So the contrast could not have been clearer.
Oh, my gosh. I want to get to Katy and Mike, but before, let's hear a little bit more from Vice President Kamala Harris's major speech last night in Washington, D.C. She spoke to a crowd of, the number that we're looking at here is about 60,000 people. That's according to an NBC News estimate. For perspective, the House committee that investigated the January 6th attack estimated that 53,000 people attended Trump's speech there that day. The vice president's speech laid out the threats the former president poses to our democracy and the kind of president she would be.
Look, we know who Donald Trump is. He is the person who stood at this very spot nearly 4 years ago and sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol to overturn the will of the people in a free and fair election. An election that he knew he lost. Americans died as a result of that attack. 140 law enforcement officers were injured because of that attack. And while Donald Trump sat in the White House watching as the violence unfolded on television, he was told by his staff that the mob wanted to kill his own vice president. And Donald Trump responded with 2 words: "So what?" America, that's who Donald Trump is. And that's who is asking you to give him another 4 years in the Oval Office. For as long as I can remember, I have always had an instinct to protect. There's something about people being treated unfairly or overlooked that frankly just gets to me. I don't like it. It's what my mother instilled in me, a drive to hold accountable those who use their wealth or power to take advantage of other people. The drive to protect hardworking Americans who aren't always seen or heard and deserve a voice. And I will tell you that is the kind of president I will be. And look, I'll be honest with you, I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. But here's what I promise you. I will always listen to you, even if you don't vote for me. I will always tell you the truth, even if it is difficult to hear. I will work every day to build consensus and reach compromise to get things done. And if you give me the chance to fight on your behalf, there is nothing in the world that will stand in my way. On day 1, if elected, Donald Trump would walk into that office with an enemies list. When elected, I will walk in with a to-do list full of priorities of what I will get done for the American people. And I will work with everyone, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, to help Americans who are working hard and still struggling to get ahead. Nearly 250 years ago, America was born when we wrested freedom from a petty tyrant. Across the generations, Americans have preserved that freedom, expanded it, and in so doing, proved to the world that a government of, by, and for the people is strong and can endure. And those who came before us, the patriots at Normandy and Selma, Seneca Falls and Stonewall, on farmlands and factory floors, they did not struggle, sacrifice, and lay down their lives only to see us cede our fundamental freedoms. They didn't do that only to see us submit to the will of another petty tyrant.
You know, I've been told through the years since doing this work that people will come up and say, well, why can't politicians work together? Why can't they compromise? Why are they always campaigning and always taking one extreme side or the other? Why can't they follow the dream that America works best when we work together, and that it's a government of the people, for the people, by the people, for the people? Jon Meacham, some words said last night, I wrote some of them down here, that we haven't heard from Donald Trump ever. Where she says, I'm not perfect, I make mistakes. By the way, that's not weakness, that's a political strength to be able to say that. I will always listen to you. I will always tell you the truth, even when it's hard. I will build consensus and I will compromise to get things done. And when I go into the White House on my first day, well, unlike Donald Trump, I will have a to-do list, while he will have an enemies list. And by the way, he's already told us that. But I think what's so compelling is we've talked about these people, old line Republicans that have been desperately trying to make excuses to vote for a guy who says he's going to be an autocrat. And sometimes they say, oh, she hasn't come to the middle enough. Oh, she hasn't done. Here was Kamala Harris last night saying, if you disagree with me, I'm not going to put you on an enemies list. I'm not going to insult you. I'm going to bring you in. You're going to have a seat at the table, and we're going to work together for compromise, for consensus, for the betterment of the American people. That doesn't sound like Donald Trump. In fact, it doesn't sound like a lot of politicians we've heard over the past 30 years.
No, President Kennedy referred to the office as the vital center of action. And one of the questions we always face is, what's going to be the action of the person that we put at the center of that arena? And that's not an ideological term. It's the nature of power, even in a democracy. Right? We're shaped by this transaction often between the leaders and the led. And we're only as good as we are. But we can be made a little better if you have a president who speaks the way and who's conducted herself in the way the vice president has. I thought the speech last night was fully part of an American vernacular where you can agree or disagree with this tax rate or that tax rate, but you know what you're getting. You're getting someone who will take the oath seriously. Mm-hmm. You're getting someone who actually sees, as she said, she's not perfect. No one's canonizing anybody here. But we know what we're getting. Right. And the question is, do you want a president you would recognize who's working in a tradition that at least goes back to Lincoln? Maybe even Jackson. It's a Jackson, Lincoln, FDR, Kennedy, Reagan presidency. Or do you want to risk this on someone whose own appetites are self-evidently consuming? I know where I stand.